Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, members, officers, welcome guests, anyone at home watching on YouTube, councillors or members of the public. Welcome to this meeting of the Audit Standards and Risk Committee. Item 1 on the agenda, apologies for absence. Have we any apologies?
Thank you, Chair. We received apologies of absence this evening from Councillor Bob Rakes, who is substituted by Councillor Mary Glowett, Councillor Leanne McIntyre, who is substituted by Councillor Sean MacDonald, and Councillor Johnny Cope, who is substituted by Councillor Sashi Malvaganam.
Thank you. Item 2, minutes of previous meeting. These have been circulated. Does anybody have any comments, or am I okay to sign them? Okay, thank you. Thank you. Item 3, declarations of interest. Members are invited to declare any disclosable pecuniary or non-pecuniary interest in any of the issues we are discussing this evening. Does anyone have anything to declare? Nope. Excellent, thank you very much. Item 4, public question time. Have we had any questions? No questions have been submitted, therefore we've got nothing to answer for. 5, external audit update report. This is very timely, members. We have 2 gentlemen from Grant Thornton who are going to run us through how they've been getting on and where we are, and let's hope we'll all be smiling at the end. Over to you. If you want to speak, yeah, just...
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. So I'm Darren Wells. I'm the engagement lead for Grant Thornton, and we look forward to working with the council over the coming years. So this is a very simple report that is on your agenda tonight. It serves 2 purposes. The first is just to say where we are currently with the external audit and what the way forward is. And then the second element is a sector update, so just providing some information that you might find of interest. So where are we? So we have started our work on looking and considering the value for money, so assessing the arrangements that are in place for the council. That work is in progress. For the financial statements audit, we've agreed with your officers that we'll start that work on the 1st of October. We're awaiting the draft unaudited statement of accounts, which are expected, I believe, by the end of this month, and the supporting working papers that will allow us to start that audit. And now, with good cooperation from officers, prompt responses to audit queries, and with nothing significant arising from the audit, we would hope to be in a position to report the outcome of that work to you in January. We're holding regular meetings with the officers as we start to build an understanding of the council, and that will continue as the audit of the financial statement goes on. That's probably all I was intending to say around the report. There's a lot of talk about the statutory backstop that's been in place, and we set out a little bit of detail on page 14 of your papers. I think it's page 6 of our report. And just to be clear, I think this was covered at your meeting in August, but the journey to get back full assurance from audited accounts will take some time. So we can't rebuild the assurance that you've lost over the past few years in one fell swoop. There will be a qualified opinion on the 23-24 statements. That's inevitable. Our approach is to focus for 23-24 on the transactions in 23-24, focus on the final year balances as at the 31st of March 24 and not seek to look at opening balances. The volume of work that would be associated with that would be too great. So over the next few years, there will be a time and an opportunity to rebuild assurance, but it's just to be very clear, it won't be in year 1 or year 2. I'm happy to pick up any questions that members may have.
Thank you. The presentation slides are available on your machines. Does anybody have any questions for Grant Thornton? Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, and thank you for this report. Again, it's much clearer than we're used to receiving on this subject in this committee, so I really appreciated it. A small point on page 4 of your report, which is page 12 of the full agenda report, under value for money, and it is good to hear that you've already started work on that. You say we have provided officers for sharing with members a brief summary of the scope and our approach to the value for money review. I don't think we've received that yet, Chair, officers. Is it possible to get that?
I think Councillor Wilson, that Bob can fill you in on that.
Yes, sorry, it's my fault. Councillor Wilson, I have received it and I will share it after this meeting, if that's okay.
Thank you. Yeah, that'd be appreciated. And just to go back to your point about it being a journey to assurance, that's what you told me at the last meeting, and it's helpful to look at it that way. Obviously, there's going to be a big gap, the years that are missing. These are complicated years in the council's finances as well. So, you know, as a member of the committee, that worries me, obviously. And you'll have to give a disclaimed account because you have uncertainty on the opening balances and things like reserves and so on. How does this cycle end? Do we get to a point in the future where we do know what the reserves are and, you know, we've full assurance of the position we're in, even if we don't know where we are?
Thank you, through you, Chair. So I think the sector and the regulator and the firms and the National Audit Office as the holder of the Code of Audit Practice are still working through what might be needed to ensure that full assurance can be recovered. Because I think the element that you mentioned around the reserves, trying to rebuild sufficient assurance going back so many years with all the movements between unusable reserves and usable reserves, quite frankly, is difficult. So there's some speculation that it may eventually require a statutory instrument to set a baseline, but that's still being worked through. So I don't have any definitive answer that I can give you tonight.
If it's okay, I'll just come back one final time.
Yeah, just I could possibly add, there was a podcast this morning about this whole issue and how it's going to work. And the statutory instrument is apparently in development, and it should be completed fairly, well, by the end of this year, I think. So, yeah, the government and all the interested bodies are working on it. The other thing that was an important point for me is that they made it very clear that the disclaimed accounts will not be held against any authority. They're recognised as a fact of life that we're going to have to live with and get over. So it's looking more hopeful than it has for a long time.
Yeah, thank you. I guess this council, though, is in a worse position than most on that. Just one final point then. The worst case scenario of this lack of assurance, and I'm a layperson, so if you could correct me if I've got this wrong. So the council's revenue budget, it has to involve a large transfer from reserves every year to balance it. And if the reserves are as we've assumed they are, they're currently valued, then the council can go a few years before it goes bankrupt. If the reserves are revalued significantly lower, does that pose a risk to the financial viability of the council in the near term?
Yeah. So I think when you describe reserves being revalued low, I think you mean if we find that reserves are in some way inaccurate. If that is the case, then clearly it would bring into question the financial sustainability of the authority. So that there is that possibility. We're considering your reserves position as part of our value for money work, and that will feature quite prominent in the report that we present to you, because it's a recognised pressure that the whole local government sector is under. So you can be assured that it's high on our agenda.
Thank you, that answers my question. I'm looking forward to January as well, obviously.
Councillor Malvagnant.
Thank you, Chair. Just for your information, Mr. Watson, who is a Section 151 officer, is already, I'm sure you know of this, already published the last 3 years' accounts, which have not been audited. I'm sure you have, it's going to be disclaimed. That's what the statutory instrument is all about. And if you look at it consistently, I don't think we've blown the budget like some of them imply, or blown the reserves, because there's revenue reserves and the capital reserves. And I can't see, I've been a councillor for 4 years, I genuinely, and a chartered accountant, genuinely know that the budgets have not been blown to that extent for this council to be bust, like Councillor Wilson has just implied. It's not possible. If it is, I'm in a different planet, and Section 151 officer is in a different planet. He has even given a statement to the committee saying that this council is not bust. I just want to make you aware of that. Thank you very much.
Councillor MacDonald.
Come out. Lee, I don't want to do that.
No, I'd rather
God
not.
forbid.
I have a reputation to protect.
First of all, thanks. I want to echo Councillor Wilson's comments. I think the report you've given is very helpful and much appreciated. I think a couple of things really to just ponder on. I think it's probably one for yourself and maybe one for Mr. Watson in reality in terms of the questions. So it mentions from the previous meeting that you'll engage with the chair of the committee and the portfolio holder for finance, who is Leanne McIntyre, who I'm subbing for today. I'm leader of the council for my sins. I think that is something that we do want to see happen, so that they can talk to you about some of the historical concerns. I think Councillor Wilson has mentioned some concern around the reserves position. When do you envisage that 1-to-1, 2-to-2, whatever, happening?
Thank you. So we've met with the Councillor Betton this evening ahead of this meeting. We're happy to meet with your colleague, the portfolio holder for performance and finance. I think it's worth, that will be useful, particularly as we build an understanding of the authority. But it's worth emphasising that typically we conduct our work through officers and then reporting to this committee. We do engage with members on a one-to-one basis where it's considered it's necessary, but it's not a standing feature.
I understand that. We've had discussions in this chamber previously that it's not unreasonable practice and it's what happens in the private sector. So I hope this isn't going to be a barrier to yourselves. I think in terms of the work that myself and Councillor McIntyre and others have done with the finance team and led to some caveats around our budget this year, there is still an open item around the closure of the Jersey Trust and whether that was conducted in line with good practice. We're waiting for a second opinion, which we haven't had. And there are two large transactions relating to the accounts in 18-19 and 2021, one of 4.7 million, one of 7.4 million, which is in fact quite a large amount of the growth in the overall usable reserves, that we just want to see clarity as to where that money has come from, and that isn't just a paper transaction, that there was actually some value behind it. Those are the two main items I think that are still open from the political side in terms of understanding the reserves position. The question, but my colleague knows much more of the detail, especially I think she's an external auditor for the States of Jersey, is that right? I think she is anyway. I get confused exactly on the position.
Is it the audit committee?
Yeah, something like that. Anyway, the question back to Mr. Watson is, you've mentioned obviously that provided the draft accounts are ready by the end of the month and the working papers are ready by the end of the month, you're ready to go on the 1st of October. I think Mr. Watson will understand that previously we have had challenges between the auditors and the officers over the completion of various paperwork, which has led to delays in the programme. Are you able to give the committee confidence that you'll be able to meet the requirements of the external auditors in due time?
Thank you, Councillor MacDonald. Yes, we are working to the deadline that we've agreed with Grant Thornton to produce the draft accounts, and obviously the working papers that go along with them. It is obviously a tight deadline we work to, and the team, with a following wind and few distractions, should be able to meet that deadline.
Thank you, Mr. Watson.
Any? Councillor Lee.
Make sure one presses the right button. Grant Thornton, two questions I think I've got. One, can you talk me through a little more about how you feel about the balance sheet and the assets, in terms of, do you have confidence in what you've seen so far? And two, if the council were to miss paperwork deadlines, and I think this council has had a track record of missing paperwork deadlines, although I do understand substantial resource has been placed into that area now, so I would be surprised if we missed a deadline with extensive additional resource being placed in. What would happen?
Thank you. To the first, what are our views of your balance sheet? I can't answer that because we haven't seen your 23-24 draft statement of accounts. It's only the 23-24 accounts that we are auditing. Your previous auditor are looking at earlier years. And that's the purpose of the audit. Our work will focus on the balance sheet and your income and expenditure account. We'll focus on the year-end balance, and where we're able to complete our work, we'll give you a formal written view back on our findings. To the second question about missing paperwork, I suspect
paperwork being late rather than missing. So if there's a deadline to deliver paperwork by a certain time and it's not in your inbox, or perhaps it's lost for whatever reason, what happens in that process? With BDO, we went to the back of a queue, it became painful. What I'm trying to understand is, if we have misses this time round, what happens? I know, Leader, we've put extensive amounts of money into that area of the operation, so you may argue this is an academic question, but I would like to know what would happen if that is missed.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So we have a team ready to start 1st of October. The risk is, if we find that audit queries are not being responded to quickly enough, or the appropriate evidence can't be provided to satisfy the query, the risk is that we bump up against the statutory backstop date of the end of February, and our ability to start that rebuilding of assurance for you will be hindered. But we will report what we find, what we've been able to do by the backstop date. So we're not going to abandon you, but potentially the volume of work that we can get through and the level of assurance that we can provide will be reduced.
What's the escalation chain if something's been missed? Can you identify the posts that you would escalate to?
We have, I think we shared an escalation policy procedure with you as part of your August meeting, and that stands. So it sets out that we'll have the initial conversation with Mr. Watson. We'll escalate that to your chief executive. Where we need to bring it more formally and publicly, we'll do that to this committee.
Thank you.
That clarity is helpful, thank you.
Sorry. Yeah, just one sec. Just a question about the logistics, if you like. Following on from Rob's question, will anybody be coming here and sitting across the table, talking to our accounts, finance people, because that was something that happened in the good old days and COVID stopped and may well have helped in expediting the accounts, but it never happened really.
Thank you. So we have had those conversations. In our view, we don't think that 100% on-site is necessary. A hybrid approach where there are certain times, be it per week or every couple of weeks on-site, is helpful. I can't recall, and Keith may be able to recall the outcome of those conversations, but I think we're certainly open to being on-site, and I think it depends on the working arrangements that officers have to that effect.
Okay, thank you. Councillor McDonald.
So I also attended the highly thrilling briefing today by the gang of 5, I think, of the different industry parties that were involved. I think potentially that's one of the problems with the mess we've ended up with, that there's too many cooks trying to make this soup. It was almost as thrilling as the planning one on the MPPF, but not quite. One thing I took away from it links to your comment, I think, earlier, is this idea of increasing assurance, but not necessarily assurance. So when in your professional opinion, and I'm not going to hold you to it, it's more an opinion, when in your professional opinion, do you think that this council will get to a stage where we can feel that we've got assurance? Will it be the 2024-25 accounts, or will it be the 2025-26 accounts when they're audited?
It won't be 24-25. I think 25-26 might be an outside chance. I think it's more likely 3 to 5 years.
Thank you. So that's potentially contradictory what Councillor Mulvagan said earlier, I think, Chair.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. Just going to the second part of your report about the sector analysis, and I was interested in the page, it's page 12 of your report, which is page 20 of the full agenda pack, and it's about the health of internal audit generally in councils, and there's a link at the bottom to a sort of survey evaluation of it, and it links to the first of the 4 bullet points on that page. So looking at that link, and it surveys of lots of councils, and there's some comments from people who've taken part in it, and one of the auditors on that says, if I speak out about my concerns, including impending section 114, I will be fired. It's that simple. So I guess the question probably isn't for you, but for all of our officers, just can you reassure us that there is no question of anyone's career being damaged or anything like that if they were to speak out about financial concerns in the council? Thank you.
I'm not sure that's something that I can answer.
I don't think it is. Is there anything you could say?
Yes. it's quite clear under statute that there is only one person in the council that can issue a 114 letter, and that is a Section 151 officer. So I can state quite categorically here that I would be relying on my accountancy team and the audit team to raise their concerns with me, and I will take those concerns seriously. It's interesting that I was at a seminar on Thursday last week, and they did their quick straw poll. Only 10% of financial directors believe that they will be in a 114 situation in the next 3 or 4 years. Obviously, they all have financial funding difficulties, as we all do, but they also felt that they could put processes in place to do that. But in terms of, is anybody allowed to speak out? Most certainly they are. We have a whistleblowing policy that the council holds and respects for all our staff to feel free to use it. But I would suggest that anybody who does have those sort of financial concerns come to speak to me in the first instance.
Thank you.
Thank you. Gavin, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. And just to quickly just add to what Mr Watson has said, the official guidance is that the monitoring officer should be able to speak truth to power, and therefore that would be the role of the monitoring officer as well, to bring to the attention of councillors anything that the monitoring officer is concerned about. And I'm sure you're well aware that the statutory protection for the monitoring officer is in place, because the monitoring officer can only be dismissed by councillors.
Yeah, thank you. It was that kind of reassurance that I was after, and there is actually another link in the Grant Thornton report to the Golden Triangle, the 3 statutory officers, and how they should behave and be protected against recriminations for doing their jobs. So thank you again for that.
Thank you. Anybody else have any questions or points for these gentlemen? No? Well, thank you for coming. It's been a joy to see you here, speaking as chair of the committee. You're perfectly welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting, and I would fully understand if you didn't. It's up to you. Moving on, where are we? Oh yes, internal audit recommendations update. Alex.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. If I could just start by getting a clarification, there could have been a mix-up with circulation of the information. So has everyone got the entire list of overdue recommendations, as well as all the recommendations raised over 18 months, because that's what's on the agenda? Everyone's got that? Anyone not got it? No?
Yeah, I think they were passed around.
Passed around in hard copy, okay. So, if
Sorry,
members
can I
can
just clarify for the benefit of all the members? There should have been another spreadsheet in the agenda pack, second tab, but it didn't make it, and it's not in the hard copy. But we've just received an email from Democratic Services, which has got that in it, I assume.
That's in the hard copy as well?
It's not in the hard copy either, I'm afraid.
I do believe another recent version was just handed around in the house. It's a large one, yeah.
Thank
So
you.
yeah, you've got that as well. I've done one between 2, but if everyone would like an individual one, then I can procure some in 5 minutes.
Share.
Yeah. Share if you're that impatient.
Okay, fair enough. So hopefully members should all have that. Obviously the issue is, obviously members of the public wouldn't have the full access to the recommendations, so we can deal with that separately. So members will recall that internal audit maintains and monitors the audit recommendations over an 18-month rolling period. So the report that you see in front of you covers the last 18 months. So where audit recommendations have been fully actioned, and I'm satisfied that service departments have given me assurances, or I've checked and gone back to the service department that sufficient action has been taken on those recommendations, they'll then drop off the report. So what you see in front of you is like a rolling process for the last 18 months. If I can start very quickly by going through the 10 overdue recommendations, because in terms of risk to the authority, those are probably the ones that we need to bring to members' attention. So at the last meeting, if you can recall, we discussed probably at length, there were 6 overdue recommendations that originally derived from the council tax / revenues audit. They related to the bid process, so the business improvement district in central Camberley. I understand from speaking to work colleagues that some progress has been made on those, but in terms of just reminding members what we discussed last time, obviously in terms of the audit process, we felt that internal audit were only able to take those recommendations as far as possible. We chased the managers up, we brought the bid recommendations to the attention of members, and as I understand it, those 6 bid recommendations are still outstanding and they haven't been closed off, although I am aware from speaking to Mr. Watson that independent firm of chartered accountants, is that right, have been appointed by the bid organisation now. So hopefully some progress can be made in that area, but I don't know what stage we're at to, so I'm happy to discuss that with members in due course. There 3 recommendations relate to petty cash and the imprest audit. Now, that's not a particularly big piece of work, but there were some issues over the management of petty cash around the council over the last 2 or 3 years, which has led me to bring that audit forward because I felt that I wasn't getting sufficient assurances from managers across the council that they were properly managing their petty cash situation. So we identified a number of recommendations. I think there were 9 or 10 overall in that audit, but there were 3 outstanding at the time of writing this draft report. I have been informed today, though, from Sue McCubbin, so the acting head of service for the theatre, that those 3 recommendations have now been actioned, and the venue manager has provided me some documentation to show what action they've taken. So they relate to, I was concerned whether they didn't have specific written procedures to deal with petty cash. They weren't using proper templates to put transactions through the system, and there was a slight discrepancy. I appreciate it's not a huge amount of money, but it could be an indication of more serious problems. I wanted to make sure that the service gave it proper due care and attention, and they properly investigated it, which, as I said, only this afternoon they've given me the assurance that they have done. So apologies, those 3 are obviously still showing as outstanding on the report, but I'm happy to take questions on those after my presentation if you want more clarification. The other outstanding recommendation relates to the payroll audit. So this particular issue relates to the provision of establishment lists. So the HR team run an establishment list for each service, and they distribute that establishment list to each service, and it's down to the management team within that service to go through the establishment list, see the posts in place, see any particular vacancies, check whether staff listed on the establishment list are full-time, part-time, whether they're prorated hours. The importance of that check is to make sure that if there are any vacancies, they've been properly identified within that control process, and if staff have maybe seconded to another service, that is being properly recognised within those reports. What I have found by speaking to HR management is that not all establishment lists are being dealt with promptly by services and given back to HR to deal with their accountants. But what I would say from a positive point of view, by speaking to the head of HR of the last week or so, they do have a much better system in place now where they deal with the accountants who are like acting as the business partners within their division, they're working a lot more closely with the services. So obviously when they have their monthly accountancy meetings, for example, they may perhaps be looking through the staffing levels and budgets for the staffing and maybe identifying those particular issues at a much earlier stage. But I have flagged it because it was picked up in the payroll audit, but I'm not 100% satisfied that I can say to members that that recommendation has been fully actioned and closed off, so that's why I brought it to the attention. So that's the overdue recommendations, Chair. In terms of the rest of the report, obviously you see in front of you the rest of the body of the audit work. So what you see there is a flavour or an indication of the sort of audit recommendations and issues that the internal audit team is actually flagging up and working with the services. So it gives you an indication of the sorts of areas we're identifying. It gives you an indication of how many weaknesses in control or recommendations we're actually raising with services. It gives you an indication of how old some of those recommendations are as well in terms of their target dates. But I think, Chair, from a positive perspective, and I think I brought this out last time, the vast majority, obviously, of the audit recommendations have been satisfactorily implemented to my for me to give assurance to management and to members that work is being done to progress those. So the 10 overdue recommendations, some of those, since of which been closed off, is only a small percentage, probably less than 10% of the overall body of our audit recommendations. So in terms of the direction of travel or in terms of the performance of the organisation, I think that's a positive thing. Obviously, if I was reporting back to members that 30, 40, 50% of audit recommendations are still overdue, that would give rise to a lot more serious concern. But in terms of these 10, some of which has since been closed off, I'm quite happy with that. So I'll leave it there, Chair. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Members, any questions for Alex? Councillor Lee.
I beat Councillor Wilson.
You did.
First of all, Alex, from the comments Councillor Richard Wilson mentioned, you've got my 110% full support in the role that you do, for the things that you highlight. You do a superb job, and I'm very grateful for it. The first one I wanted to pick up on was claiming mileage without business insurance. My concern about people actually claiming mileage without business insurance is technically they're driving uninsured. So should they be claiming mileage if they don't have business insurance would probably be my question there. I appreciate it's a reasonably obscure one, and that case was particularly obscure where it was the insurer deliberately trying to get out of what in effect any reasonable person would have assumed was a claim the insurer should have paid out. But it's just an awkward pitfall there for our hard-working staff and one to perhaps consider. I don't know if there's a dispensation where I've worked with staff where they've had to add that on. I've asked them to put the claim for adding the business insurance into their policy through as expenses, so I don't know if we would do that here. It's just an observation if we're asking staff to drive on behalf of the business, whether the business should be covering the cost of adding it on, because it's normally the admin fee that adds it on. The premium doesn't change. Very much welcome the spotlight on information governance. Sally, obviously you're here today and welcome. I think it's good to have a positive spotlight on that area, because I think looking through from a previous meeting there were some discrepancies in various policies, and I appreciate what a huge amount going on within the organisation. So trying to pull together historical stuff and tidy stuff up is no easy feat. So thank you for what you are doing there, and thank you for driving things forward. And I've seen some real positive improvements in a couple of the policies. I think particularly the whistleblowing piece, the no blame culture piece, which I think was a real pleasant piece to hear coming through. So thank you there. So more of a comment on yours, but a little bit of a question on yours, Alex.
Thank you for the question, Councillor. If I go back to you, I'm not aware that the council reimburses staff to add on a business clause to their insurance. I'm not aware that they can actually claim that. I appreciate your comment that it can be identified separately from the premium, but from memory, my particular premium, I couldn't identify the additional business clause and how that affected the premium. So I don't know, in that example, how a member of staff would be able to claim that back if they couldn't identify the individual amount.
It's the administrative cost. So when you make an in-year amendment to your car insurance policy, they charge you an admin fee.
Okay.
So it's the reimbursement of the admin fee, which was where the question was. I'm not asking for council to change policy on the hoof. It's just an observation that if we're asking staff to drive and they've got to change their insurance policy and there's an admin cost in year, there's a question mark over who should bear the cost. I'll not necessarily look for an answer because I know the chief exec is over my right shoulder and may want time to reflect on that.
Mr. Watson, you might.
Yes, just to say, Councillor Lee, thank you for the question. It's policy for the council that if you are driving on council business, you have to have business insurance. It's in your terms and conditions and contract of employment for when you join the council. So when you get paid the 45 pence a mile, which is the recommended Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs rate, that includes an element for fuel, wear and tear on the vehicle, and maintain the vehicle in roadworthy condition, and also for insurance. So my view would be that people changing in year, if they didn't have it before and they had to change to it, would just be a cost they'd have to bear. But I mean, we can ask our HR team to look at it, but it would probably mean it could become a taxable benefit.
One is thinking then, based on that, if it's a contractual obligation, it's on joining. If in year they need to change their car policy to fulfil their role of employment, it would be that first year, because it is the admin fee that's the killer in this situation.
If I could just pick up on your second point then in terms of the records. I think one of the issues I had when I did the fieldwork and the testing of the mileage claims and the expenditure was that the process by which that the service was capturing the business insurance seemed to be some sort of lag between when they're receiving that documentation. So it's more than likely that the majority, if not all, of employees of the council were actually jiving legally with business insurance, but the record keeping, the housekeeping behind that process wasn't up to scratch in my view. So when I was doing the testing, I was asking to see copies of insurance, but what the central service, the back office that were asking for those records, they were having to chase officers up. So I'm happy to go back later on in the year to make sure that all those cases where we weren't able to identify valid insurance at that time, I was confident that the officer would have valid insurance, but they hadn't provided the necessary paperwork on a timely basis in order for me to tick that off as part of the fieldwork, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Thank you, Alex. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. It might be a question for you, Chair, rather than for the auditor. So the remaining outstanding internal audit recommendations, we had a policy that we brought in for this committee a few meetings ago that if recommendations were outstanding, then the responsible officer for them would be invited to the committee. Have they been invited this time?
That is something that we discussed. Oh, there we go.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Wilson. I'm happy to take that one. So, yes, you're absolutely right. And the two officers in relation to some of the audit outcomes or outstanding actions were invited along this evening. But given that the information was provided to the audit manager today, granted at short notice, I made the decision that I didn't think it was necessary for them to come along. The audit manager had determined that they had sufficient information to be able to strike those through. Granted, it wasn't in time for it to be reflected in your papers, but given the workloads of officers, I didn't feel that it was prudent for them to sit through an evening meeting just to effectively have it confirmed that that audit recommendation was struck through.
Okay, thank you.
I think Councillor Wilson and Mr. Stevens and Alex, the point of inviting people to discuss the non-compliance with the request and everything was fulfilled by us discussing it yesterday morning. And an invitation went out and the information was forthcoming. As the more people that figure this out, the better Alex's responses will be.
Yeah, and that's a much better solution for everyone concerned, I think. Thank you.
Councillor MacDonald.
So I've got 2 quick points. One just triggered by that. I don't know whether Mr. Stevens would be kind enough to give an update on where he thinks we are with the bid, because that is about half a dozen of the actions. And we did say it was with the 2 of us to progress at the previous meeting. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Leader. A point of clarification on that. I'm not aware that a company has been appointed yet. I am aware that there was a company that had been selected, but to date I've not had confirmation from the chair of the bid board. They have actually been appointed. I have chased and I will continue to do so, and I'm quite happy to report back to this committee when there is an update to give.
Thank you. Councillor MacDonald.
Yeah,
and
thank you.
Councillor Melvagnam.
Yep, so my second point, and thank you for the clarification, Mr. Stevens. So again, just to echo what Councillor Lee said, thanks ever so much for your work, Mr. Middleton, much appreciated, and the diligence and all the recommendations and everything else, and obviously to the officers that are delighted to receive these gifts. I'm sure they're happy to improve their processes as a result of it. One thing that struck me though, and it's not for us as councillors to get into the operational detail, was when situations arise, such as, for example, the petty cash procedure in the theatre, and it's the obvious one that sticks out from the papers. Rather than writing a procedure to try and adjust something like that, could the opportunity have not been taken to change the game by the complete elimination of cash through the use of technology, prepayment cards, all this kind of stuff, where there would have been a complete audit trail for the relevant officers, etc., etc., etc.?
Thank you, Councillor, for the question. Yeah, it's something that we have discussed with staff in the past in terms of the operation of the petty cash. Obviously, over the last 2, 3, 4 years, the council's rolled out the use of credit cards or corporate cards. So we have 2 types of cards. We have a corporate credit card and a procurement card, which certain designated officers have been given. However, from my understanding, petty cash is for emergency, last-minute, small value transactions where a credit card or a procurement card may not be fully appropriate. So it could be, for example, to give you an example, the theatre, they may be delivering a show, take the Panto, for example, they need to get a prop or they need to get some sort of supplies at last minute that they may have to go to, I don't know, a corner shop for, that may not accept a card, or certainly wouldn't want a purchase order being raised for that item, and therefore petty cash might be the only alternative. So there are going to be some examples where cash is still important for them. Family support is another example. Family support operate a petty cash system as well, where they're dealing with vulnerable or homeless individuals that they might have to give them cash, for example, to get home on public transport, where the use of purchase order or credit card is not appropriate in those circumstances. So we have discussed at length, and I know I raised it with Mr. Watson probably last year, the year before, trying to eliminate as far as possible the circulation of cash within the authority, because it's not just the issue of money going missing, it's the fact that it costs the council money for cash collection as well, from the cash collection company's point of view. So we do try and eliminate that as far as possible, but there are still some outlying service areas that still rely on petty cash for those last-minute small value transactions where no alternative is really practical. So does that address your question?
It does, yeah. Thank you. Yep, noted.
Councillor Melvagnam.
Thank you, Chair. A question for you or for Mr. Stevens, really. I thought we had a representative for our councillor representation in the bid as within the organisation. I remember Alan McLafferty was the representative previously. I don't know who the rep is now. Because I see this bid problem could have been solved through them. Not that bid is helping us, but there you go. I'd like to understand that. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Melvaganam. Yes, there is a local authority representative on the board, and that is Councillor Calfine Cook. We also have an officer observer that attends the board meetings as well, just to make sure that any issues in relation to the council or any matters in relation to the council are dealt with as swiftly as possible, so we've got a neat conduit through. This very much is a matter around the collection of the bid levy, and therefore we are dealing with it as an officer matter, and as such we have not brought Councillor Fine Cook into the conversation yet. While she is aware, we've not asked for her involvement. We will continue to pursue it as an officer group with the support of the leader.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you. Just to go back to the point about cash, I don't think I've used cash since before the pandemic, but I wonder if you've audited recently or have you got any recommendations about the car parks, because a lot of the car parks are going to have their pay-on-foot machines changed, so they don't accept cash anymore. So I was just wondering if there's a possible gap there when they're removed and they've got loads of cash in them to be disposed of. Will the cash still be collected by the council?
I know when I've done parking audits over the last couple of years, there has been some discussion with the parking service and the head of service in terms of what they would do to remove, or what the barriers are to remove cash from the system. However, I suppose I was putting forward my internal audit recommendation, or from the internal audit perspective, what I consider to be the risks of the system, but they had to balance that against how they could effectively deliver a service that was fully inclusive, dealing with all residents of the borough, including those that are most vulnerable, those that only deal with cash and don't have mobile phone use for apps or don't have credit cards. I'm probably also surmising that reports have gone to the executive in terms of parking in the future delivery of the parking service within the borough, in terms of how they would most effectively deliver those services, including the increased parking fees. And there must have been discussion at that time around can they feasibly remove cash from the system, and I suppose those various options or recommendations would have been put forward in parking executive reports, which I'm not, haven't got recollection of what the precise details will be of those.
So the actual changeover to the new machines that's going to be rolled out in the next few months is not something that you've been given sight of, just to be clear?
I've been given sight of the contract because we've had a look at the various contracts with the organisations. So I've looked at it more from the point of governance and effective risk management, rather than the actual delivery of the service, which is probably more in line with what the head of service and the parking manager feel that the parking service needs to deliver for its residents of the borough. Whether or not they've gone out to the market and consulted with residents in terms of what they would perceive or what they would like to see a proper parking services to be delivered, I'm not sure. But it's certainly an area, as I said, I focus more in terms of the risk and the security and not in terms of service delivery, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Chair. Reminds me of a very eloquent speech by one Councillor David Whitcroft about older people being capable of using contactless payment cards, which led me on to my question. By taking cash and card payments, you have redundancy in terms of protecting the revenue stream coming in, because you're not going to lose revenue if you're going to reduce the risk of not being able to take one payment form or the other. One would suggest if sites are going cashless, we challenge the providers as to what their redundancy process is, because as you remove cash, you go from 2 payment mechanisms to 1. You've only got that one card payment mechanism. It's then dependent on one internet connection. So where those companies are selling as cashless machines, the challenge back to them is what is their redundancy? How are they going to protect our revenue stream going forward when we lose internet connectivity through one route or part of the card machine? So that's perhaps a question to ask behind the scenes, but maybe not one to answer tonight.
Thank you. Members, any more questions for Alex? Thank you very much. As usual, very well done. Corporate risk register. Need some new teeth. Sally.
Thank you, Chair. So I've brought to you tonight the Corporate Risk Register. The register is brought to this committee 6 monthly for your review. Last time it was brought was back in March, so we are now due. I am hoping that you all have the tracked changes version of the register, which will make it easier for you to identify the changes that have taken place or happened on the register since its last review back in March. Just to remind councillors, this is the register of key corporate risks identified within the council. We do have service area risk registers as well, and we have a process in place where service area risk is reported up to corporate if required, i.e. if the risk at service level is high following mitigation. We have the Corporate Risk Management Officers Group that review this register on a quarterly basis, and that is where we also discuss high service risk as well. So as you see the changes over the last 6 months, there hasn't been too many changes. The vast majority of the risks have stayed the same, so they are what we still perceive as risks. However, we have put mitigations in place to try and reduce that risk, and they are now at the stage where we need to continue monitoring them, so they need to remain on, we feel they need to remain on the register. You will note risk 4, failure of major contractor, is still a red following mitigations, which obviously isn't ideal when you've got a risk register. The idea is to try and reduce that risk, but it was just felt that because of the ongoing situation, that was still a high risk and needed to be recorded as such. You will note that there are 2 new risks on the register. The first one being risk 8, which is a regeneration of property projects. So this is on the register because we believe there is a risk of delays in regeneration due to market factors, difficulties in sourcing suppliers, partners, affordability due to cost increases, etc., which could result in delayed developments and increased costs on projects, as well as there is a difficulty in us finding alternative accommodation for SCC. So it was just felt that that should be included on the corporate risk register. It is a relatively new risk on the register, so you will see that we haven't yet mitigated it down a level, but hopefully it will be monitored and that will soon be reducing. The other new risk is risk 12, which is the transformation programme. We are obviously running a big programme internally to try and transform. There is a risk, or we feel that there is a risk that the programme could impact on staff morale. And we obviously feel that if the programme fails, there would be obviously an impact on council finances and reputation. So again, we just felt it was a risk that needed to be on the register. You will see also that the old risk 11 has been removed. That was a risk around recruitment and retention. That was a risk that was on the register initially due to our struggles with recruiting to certain specialist roles and finance. We are now in a position where we have those roles filled and our current retention is strong. So it was just felt that that had been reduced to such a level that it could be removed. I've also brought to your attention tonight the risk appetite statement. This is something that came out of the meeting this March, where it was asked if we could write a statement. This is a draft statement. It's actually quite difficult to write a statement where you have one statement fits all for all the different categories of risks. So we have written it in such a way that we have put a tolerance level for each risk strategy, but it is, as I say, draft, and we really do welcome your feedback and comment on how you feel. Is that being written in the right way? So yeah, do very much appreciate a comment on that one.
Thank you. If we take the risk register first and then ask for comments on the risk appetite statement, yes? Is it risk? Councillor MacDonald.
I just thought we'd have a bit of variety by me going first rather than Rob or Councillor Lee or Councillor Wilson. Thank you very much, Ms Turnbull, for the report and for the update. I'm not entirely sure. I have got the track changes version. I'm looking at the one in Modern Gov, but I'll thank you for the explanation. It was very clear. Say again. Okay. Okay, I don't do paper. I've tried to show leadership by going paperless. But if we look at item 5, the mitigation talks about ILO training and BET coordinator training. Unless the update shows differently, which I'd be very happy to be corrected, I'm moderately sure that's the same wording as was there last time we looked at this, which probably means we haven't progressed the action, which means we haven't really mitigated the risk. Am I missing something?
We are on a better position,
Sally, can you press the...
Yes, I'll take that, Chair, if that's all right. Thank you, Leader. I think the challenge that we have is clearly with any organisation there is a churn of staff, and clearly we have new staff who are expressing interest in becoming instant liaison officers or BET coordinators, but unfortunately we also have staff who are skilled and trained in those areas that then leave. So there is a bit of a cycle, but Ms Turnbull is right, we are in a better position than we were. We are increasing the number of BET coordinators and ILOs, but we're still not in a position where either ourselves or Applied Resilience are completely happy with the numbers that we have, because we'd like to ensure as much resilience as possible, because clearly having to deal with emergencies such as the ones that are set out in the risk register does require a substantial amount of resource, especially if they're over a long period of time.
Thank you, Mr Stevens. Thank you. Would it just be possible somehow to show the progress or otherwise in the report in future, so for argument's sake we had a certain number now and then it's updated to a better number or worse number, whatever, just so that we can see, because it just looked like the words were the same. The second item I had was the exposure to the Treasury risk, and I think it may come up later. It doesn't feel to me like we're mitigating that down to a 4. I think we could have a long discussion about what the final rating should be, but I don't think it's a 4.
Okay, thank you. I take that on board, and we will discuss it at the next risk management officers meeting. Thank you.
Mr Watson.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, it can be subjective as to the rating, and willing to accept that it may not be a 4. We are moving to a process, what they call the 4 T's around the risk: treat, tolerate, terminate or transfer. In this case, it's going to sit very much in the tolerate, because a lot of the factors that are driving our Treasury pressures are not able to be influenced by the Council. There are certain factors we could do. We can try and reduce our current debt pile, but that would then require us to sell assets. And that is a slow process. I wouldn't recommend a fire sale of our assets, because we're probably at the bottom of the market right now anyway. So we are doing what we can to try and mitigate the exposure to this Treasury risk. We are forward dealing where we can. We are trying to get better deals from the market. We're even looking at potentially trying to do a debt swap with Phoenix, who are quite keen to do something on that. But again, it requires us to have some form of asset to be able to pay back some of this debt, which we haven't got right now.
Thank you, Mr Watson. That makes a lot of sense. A final point, if the Chair would bear with me, is I noticed that many other councils are really struggling with the impact of homelessness. In fact, many councils are now having to call emergencies on the back of it. Now, we're very lucky with the officers and the situation we're in. However, I was concerned that that didn't pop up in the register. Should I be assured that it's probably in the set of risks immediately underneath this top 10?
Thank you. Yeah, we have actually discussed the issue of homelessness because it was raised from service up to the corporate risk management group. So yes, it is within the service register as something that is being monitored.
Thank you.
Bob?
Yes, and just to add to that, Ms Turnbull's quite right. We do discuss homelessness. We are aware of it at this point. Our manager reassures us that it's not as bad as it is in some other councils, but we know it's there as a pressure and it gets discussed at every risk management group. And it may be coming in as a new entry at some point in time.
I think we hope not, from so many different reasons for the people involved primarily, but obviously the financial consequences as well.
Councillor Lee?
So my first point, most of it's been covered by Councillor Sean MacDonald. Exposure to Treasury, just to read moderate, some reputational damage up to £200,000. I think our interest rate variance is more than £200,000 at the moment, so I would question how that could be a 2 rather than a 3, which is 200k to a million or over a million. And I think I'd ask the questions around that interest variance that's currently happening. And if we're in the £1 million mark, that's probably a 4 based on that. So I would say that is extremely optimistic in a very optimistic world. I'd question that, and our auditors are here as well. So maybe when you're doing your external audit, it's something to review and take a view on in terms of the risk register. Because I think that's a high risk strategy, putting it as low as that. I'd like to see the risk treatment plan to justify it. Moving on, I'd like to take a look at item 11, cybersecurity. So it looks like there's a good piece of work that's gone on there behind the scenes. Tech and security is quite often the glue that holds a business or operation together, but quite often the unsung and sometimes under-resourced or underfunded hero. It's quite clear, working in the industry, reading through the lines of the things that are being fixed, that we've got quite an immature tech function at the moment, because the things that are being fixed or listed as being fixed recently are the sort of things you'd have expected to have been fixed between 5 and 10 years ago. So I think it's good, Alex, that you're shining an internal audit spotlight on there to help support those people working tech and cybersecurity within our organisation, because it is quite often a challenging space. They're the first people that get shouted at metaphorically when something goes wrong, but they're normally the last people there at night to turn the lights off to make sure things are working. Cool. I think looking down here at the item around deployment of a logging platform, that's a fantastic step forward, and that's really good to see. My next question would be, who's watching the logs? Because, of course, behind the scenes, most cyber incidents happen on a Friday night. So it's understanding how we're managing and monitoring that. I think tech people perhaps want to try and do their best, and they do deliver. But I think we as a business need to acknowledge that their work doesn't finish at 5 o'clock of an evening. So I hazard a guess that whilst they've put in a major shift in terms of the effort to transform things here, and we should really celebrate that, because there's a huge step forward taking place here quite clearly. And I think, Chief Exec, if you can pass my thanks on to them personally, it is a big shift they've put in. And I know that because that's the industry I work in. I suspect we're being slightly over-optimistic as to how far we've moved it down. So I think we do need to think a little bit about a ransomware incident, where we're at in terms of being able to defend it. When you have a ransomware incident, you pretty much got nothing and you've got to rebuild from scratch. So estimating that a ransomware incident in this operation would cost £200,000 to recover, I'd beg to differ. I'd say you're into the £1 million plus mark if we end up losing everything. And that's the reality of that type of risk. So it's understanding the risk treatment there and the investment that could be needed to transform that piece. So those are my observations. But yeah, it's absolutely crucial that we sing the praises of the effort and hard work that's already gone in there. It's really good.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. Cybersecurity is one of the most scariest, from my point of view, information governance, the scariest thing. It's, as they say, it's not a case of if, it's a case of when. And there's, just to note, there's something on here that we haven't done. We are actually doing fake phishing to our staff at the moment as a training course. So we really are trying to get, because it's the start, if it's going to happen, it obviously can happen behind the scenes, but the staff are going to let obviously a big risk to us as well, allowing people in. So we are doing a lot of work at the moment as well on training our staff to try and get them to recognise what is potentially a malicious attack.
I think that's important as a first line of defence, but it's that response piece when something happens and how we cope without those systems. Imagine doing your job with pen and paper. Your computer's not working. This meeting, there's no live stream. It's just thinking those things through.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you. And thank you for the track changed version as well. It's useful. Risk to the text on mitigation, I think it might need updating a bit, because it says that the latest iteration of the MTFS was February 23. Maybe it's just a typo. And it's not, this isn't for now, but once we get the Grant Thornton report on value for money in next January, so just a few months away, that might shed more light on this potential risk. It does say that part of the mitigation is that the council holds reserves to deal with fluctuations. So if the reserves are revalued, that might mean the mitigation isn't effective at all anymore. And we've heard there is a risk. Hopefully it's a small risk. There's a risk to the viability of the council financially overall if that happens. So I mean, I guess we won't know until Grant Thornton tell us, but yeah, that's really just for later. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else have any questions? No? Thank you. Sally.
Chair, you said we were dealing with the register first, then we move on to...
Yes, I did. I was wondering if you'd noticed that, Sergeant Wilson. Would you like to go through the statement? And we'll see.
Yes, hopefully you've all got a copy and you've read that. So, as I say, draft version, so really do welcome your comment and your feedback on that.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you. Yeah, this is really good to see this statement of risk appetite, and the fact that it was brought about by Councillor McIntyre at this committee. I think it really just shows the value of having people with that sort of professional background, and that's why she's not here at the moment. She's probably at work, and having their abilities at the council's disposal. So yeah, I just think I totally approve of it. I think it's going to be a really valuable tool to help manage the risk as well, so we can see where the risks are relative to the council's appetite for these specific categories of risk. My question is just a procedural one. So it's draft at the moment. Is it a decision going to be taken to adopt it at the executive or some other part of the council?
I think the plan is that this is going to, once approved, it will then be part of the risk management strategy. So it's an officer's document.
Right, so that's delegated to modify that strategy to the officers, yeah.
Councillor MacDonald.
Again, just to echo what Councillor Wilson said, thank you very much for preparing it. Just a couple of things that struck me, and it's always easier as the editor than the writer, so please don't take anything I say in the wrong way. The first section I thought was really clear around principles, then moves on to risk categories. Item 5, reputational risk. We welcome robust debate, but will seek to protect and enhance our reputation weighing against the broader objectives of the Council. I guess it was the we'll welcome the robust debate I didn't quite get. What am I missing? Help me.
We did initially say a zero tolerance on that one. What the original draft was, a zero tolerance. It was just felt that obviously we do have some residents who will like to get into discussions with us, and we don't want to be in the position where we're saying we're not talking to you, zero tolerance. So it was just trying to open up discussions. We would have discussions with residents.
Thank you. Okay, and then I guess the only other question I had, based on partly the history which Councillor Wilson commented on, was whether Councillor McIntyre had a chance to feedback, because I think this is a particular area of her expertise. And if not, would it be possible before it goes into the process that perhaps Mr. Watson and Councillor McIntyre could just go through it together and see if they could pick up on anything that we haven't, whatever it is, the 6 of us here. Oh, sorry, 7, Chair.
Yes.
Thanks. Anyone else? No. Thank you. Item 8, Q1 Treasury Management Outturn Report. Mr. Watson. Or is it?
I shall pass over to Miss Walsford.
Thank you. So this is the quarter one report for Treasury Management for 24-25. It highlights the position at the end of June. Appreciate that's a while ago, and projects the interest receivable and payable for the financial year. It also advises councillors that we've complied with the approved prudential indicators that were approved in February. There is also a brief economic update in the main report to help give you context with more detail in Appendix 2, which is the commentary from our advisors link. The capital programme is presented in more depth in the main budget monitoring reports, which are presented to P&F Committee and the Executive, and that hasn't yet gone through the cycle. But for context, the current projections are about 11 million expenditure this financial year. Around 3.8 million of that is funded by grants, Section 106, etc., and which means we will increase the underlying need to borrow by about 7.3 million unless the capital programme slips. The borrowing position of the council is broadly similar to the opening balance of the year at 177 million, and projected interest costs for the year at 6.5 million. On investment balances have reduced slightly to 7.5 million, and we project around £500,000 worth of interest receivable for the year. And that covers the main points. Do you have any questions?
Councillor MacDonald.
Thank you for the report, Ms Welsfold, and for your support to me earlier today and some other discussions. I've got a couple of soft ones to start with, if that's okay. One relates to the capital, the forecast capital programme of 11.1 million. I think we've had discussions about the abilities of organisation to spend their capital budget. Is this what we really think they will spend, or what they're currently pretending they're going to spend?
It was based on the position for the first 3 months of the year, so we will have an updated position, which I think we are projecting will be a bit lower.
And my second query was around section 4.1, because it mentions the C word, cash. I know Councillor McIntyre, if she was here, would make the point around the long-term forecasting of cash and the management of cash, and what that looks like for the council as we take on some of the financial challenges that we have. We also transfer from internal to external borrowing to address some of those. When could we expect to see a longer-term, I guess, cash forecast, and that would be sort of on the same basis of plan versus actual, and in what sort of report would it end up coming back through the system? Thank you.
We are working on that now as part of budget monitoring and as part of the budget process. So we're starting work just through that process. So that's just started. So we'll continually update as it goes through the cycle. But yeah, happy to run through with anybody what kind of assumptions we're making if anyone wants to know a bit more detail.
But that, just to check, that would be multi-year forecasting, would it? Yeah, thanks ever so much. Yeah.
Councillor Malvagan and then Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, taking on what the leader said here, local point 2.2, the 11.1 million per capital, that actually gets approved through the exec, and there's a budget figure somewhere. So there is nothing new as a number. If it changes, it will go to the exec, and the exec has to approve that increase or decrease or whatever it is. Am I right in saying that? Sorry, I had my laptop thing on. My apologies.
No, that's correct. So we start the year assuming we're going to spend the full capital programme, and as we go through the year, we will adjust it. Any adjustments to reprofiling will be reported in the budget monitoring as it goes through the process, so it'll be very clear where we have made some adjustments, and also if, for example, there are any supplementary estimates approved or schemes that are finished that are no longer needed, that will also be reported at the same time.
So fundamentally, there's nothing new here. It's just what we know already, and you're just reporting on what you already know, and it has been approved through. That's a confirmation I wanted, actually. Thank you very much.
Mr. Watson.
Yes, just to clarify, the capital budgets are set by council and agreed as part of the annual budget setting, which was in February 24, which was agreed unanimously by the council at that time. As Ms Walsford says, reprofiling of the capital programme, once approved by council, it can be an executive function, but any new projects then have to go back to council to be added in terms of the constitution.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you. It's page 53 of the full agenda pack, and it's point 3.4. It says the projected cost of borrowing for the year is 6.5 million against a budget of 2.1 million. So on the council's website, there's the MTFS, and page 24 of that, and it's point 8.4 says for 24-25, the estimates for debt interest and repayment provisions are as follows. There's a column adding up the debt interest on annuity, maturity and short-term loans, and the estimate there is 5.4 million. So a lot closer to the 6.5 that's the current estimate. Just which figures are correct?
Yes, thank you for that, Councillor Wilson. I suggest the figure that you said is closer to 6.5 is the correct figure. it shows how it's broken down in that table. What we've had is over the last few years, the interest located in the service budgets for the services that manage the assets that were then acquired by that debt in the first place. One of the things we've been doing over the last few months is finding out where those budgets are, making sure they're right. It does seem that they've been undercast previously, which is where we're getting this 2.1 from. Part of the process during budget setting this year is to get those budgets right and to make sure they tie in with the assets that the debt was notionally used to acquire going forward. It's something that we've always wanted to be able to do. The priority so far for the council's finance team has been clearing the backlog of accounts, bringing those accounts up to date, and that's given us the ability to then have this deeper dive into the budgets. And this time the budgets are being built from the bottom upwards, which is the recommended way, whereas previously, due to the shortfall in staffing capacity in the team, they were built from the top down. So I suggest that the 5.4 million figure, whatever it is, in the table is the more accurate one.
Right, thank you. That makes more sense. But just for context, the total net revenue of the council is about 14.7 million. So an increase in interest, even from 5.4 million to 6.5 million, is a huge chunk of that net income. And if the increase in the interest is what it says in the report, even if you take out the interest equalisation reserve contribution, it's about a 20% extra unexpected cost of the council's overall revenue. Is that sustainable?
So, firstly, in there, the net revenue budget is where it is. Some of these interest charges are already in that net figure. So, for example, the property services has its overall gross income, and then we deduct from that the debt financing to give their figure that contributes to the medium-term financial strategy and the annual budget. So some of it's in there. Is constantly using our reserves sustainable? The answer to that is quite simply no, it's not. It's been stated for the last 3 years in the Section 25 statement of the medium-term financial strategy. That's a statement that I have to write on the robustness of estimates and the sustainability of the council. It has been highlighted at many committees by not just myself, but obviously councillors. And it was actually covered off when I reported to the Select Committee in November last year, where I was asked, are we in imminent danger of being bankrupt? And I said we weren't imminently, but if we continue to use our reserves, we will eventually hit that point. That's why we have a challenging few years of budgeting to try and make sure that we close any budget gap where we can to become self-sufficient and not rely on our reserves all the time. And that is something that we're addressing, again, with the better knowledge of the budgets that we've now got from the bottom-up rebuild.
Councillor Lee. Okay. Councillor McDonald, then
it's not going to carry favours with me, you know that, right?
Excellent. Always the best way.
So, looking at this report, we're saying that the budget for interest is 2.1, but the run rate is 6.5. And based on all the information provided within the document, we can all see the 6.5 million run rate. When one goes to the medium-term financial strategy, and I think Councillor Wilson has highlighted at least one place where various figures are found, we should be looking for 2.1, or we should be looking for 2.1 plus the MRP of 2.7, which would be a total of 4.8. Where do I find those numbers in the medium-term financial strategy? And if I don't find them, what did the executive sign off What did the council sign off?
So the council will have signed off the medium-term financial strategy as presented in February 2024. So the 2.1 you won't see because it's in some of the service budgets, it's in some of the growth. There was, I think, a chunk of minimum revenue provision increase in there as well. What we also have in there is an element of the debt repayment on the annuity loans, which is included in the figures in the later table that Councillor Wilson referred to.
But if we signed off the table that Councillor Wilson refers to, we signed off 5.4 million for interest rate payments. So where do I find the 2.1?
The 2.1 will be in the revenue budget table, which was, I think, Appendix 1 or Appendix A to the MTFS, which has the service budgets in there. Within those service budgets is an element of debt financing, but these are net budgets. So therefore, where you have, for example, the property services, net from the income that they receive in is the cost of that debt financing.
I'm sorry to, thanks for your patience, Mr Watson and Chair, but I hate to push this point, but what it means is there's a fundamental discontinuity between different tables within the medium-term financial strategy, and hence, as leader of the council, I think as a subbie here onto the Audit and Standard and Risk Committee and a regular guest here, I'm deeply concerned about this because I don't think we're seeing the 5.4 million from the table Councillor Wilson mentioned in the total net cost of services. Otherwise, we would have had a higher budget overall and a bigger drain on the reserves.
Potentially, that would be the case. As I say, that is why we are doing the monitoring process and bringing it through to this committee for their attention and through the budget monitoring reports that will be coming to both the Executive and Performance and Finance Scrutiny Committee in next month now, in November now. So yes, we are now rebuilding the budgets as we go through, where we'll have better clarity around those. I will say potentially though that the level of debt financing that was in the service budgets has been undercast previously.
Thank you, Mr. Watson. Sorry, by how much? 4 million?
I would have to come back with that figure just to go through while we do the work on what's within those budgets and understand the build-up of them.
Councillor
Thank you, Mr. Watson. It's probably best if I don't say anything further.
No, it's Councillor Mal Vaganham was hopping up and down. Then you.
Thank you, Chair. That's a question you've just answered. I was actually trying to find out, I put it simply, this is the interest that has been misallocated within various categories. Am I right in simplifying it in? Yes? And also, the increase in interest rate must have had an impact on the bottom line of the MTFS as we speak. So I presume we are going to MTFS, or the budget which we set would not be the same. There could be a bigger amount we would have to take out of our reserves. Am I right in trying to simplify this entire conversation?
Potentially, although the difference between the 5 million figure and the 6 million figure that we're reporting as at Q1 is based on our forecast of what we're going to outturn around interest rates. We were given advice through various advisors, including the Treasury advisors we use. We also checked with the Office of Budget Responsibility and the Institute of Fiscal Studies, all of whom in February or December time, December 23, when we were building the budget, were indicating that the interest rates would fall and probably fall faster than they have done. Inflation was predicted to come back down to around the the Bank of England estimate of 2%, which it nearly is at. The issue that we've had is some of the inflation figures that we use for our contractual work have stayed higher than the 2%. So in terms of labour supply for construction materials, which is where a lot of our capital programme and costs are driven. So that's a higher inflation rate. So that's why there's a difference between the 5 million. In terms of the difference between the 2.1, which, as I say, you won't see as a figure in there, it's because traditionally or historically it's been undercast in the service areas, and that's what we're trying to correct.
Thank you for your forbearance. Councillor Lee.
Always happy to oblige, Chair. Sally, if we look at page 3.4, I just wondered if you could tell me the difference between 2.1 and 6.5 is obviously greater than 1 million. And this is just linking back to my concerns on the risk register, because we're hearing about Treasury and it's the Treasury item that worries me. And I just wanted to observe that we're talking about variances of greater than £1 million in Treasury, and they've happened. So I think leading back to that risk register item being green, I'm very worried, because what we've heard this evening completely contradicts what's on your report. So I'm just flagging it as for information here that we've got exposure to Treasury risk, possibility 2 out of 4, so that's a 10 to 50% likelihood, but it's happened. So one would assume that that's a 4 at the moment, because we're in a Treasury incident at the moment with the increase in interest. And then when we're looking at the value, we've heard at least 6 different values of variance, all of which have been in excess of £1 million. So my reading of your report is if it's happened, it's a 4. And if its variance is greater than £1 million, it's a 4. So that's actually a 16, not a 4. So I think we need to revisit, or the Audit Committee need to revisit this report as a matter of grave urgency based on the report and evidence we've heard this evening. I feel very uncomfortable that we're hearing this information now at this stage.
Chair, just before there's an answer, can I just remind Councillor Lee that I asked about this the last time we looked at the risk register, and the answer from the officers was because it's already happened, it's not going to get worse. So that's why it wasn't flagged as a risk.
But it's an in-year incident.
Yeah.
We are quite happy, and I will take away that we will revisit the risk register. I think when we're talking about risk and risk appetite, you have to look at how you mitigate risk and what you do. And when you start thinking about it, you can mitigate every single risk that the council has. And the council will then go broke tomorrow, because the cost of mitigation is sometimes greater than the risk you're exposed to. Hence why we run through the risk appetite type statement. So yes, as I mentioned earlier, with Treasury, the factors that have caused the higher interest rates are certainly not down to Surrey Heath Borough Council. They're not down to anything we can control. So therefore we have to manage as best we can with it. We manage the risk for the Treasury exposure through the use of our reserves, which again, as I mentioned, we can't just keep doing. But at this point in time, using the reserves means that the exposure for the council is not at that level. So yes, as a gross figure, it is a high level. In terms of the exposure to the council, we are able to mitigate through use of reserves, which is why the risk rating, having been mitigated, is lower than the original risk.
Councillor MacDonald.
Thank you, Chair. Just going back to something Councillor Mulvaggan said a minute ago, we're now looking at a 4 million variance of plan versus actual, which is horrendous by any measure. When we look at the change, though, in interest rates, Appendix 8I of the medium-term financial strategy, and of course there is a question mark in my head which bit of the medium-term financial strategy I can now believe, states that the planned assumptions for interest rates is 5.25% falling to 4.5% within the year. Now, obviously that would be phased over time, some sort of averaging, whatever. So that would have been the plan interest rate on which the short-term debt would have been modelled, albeit there's a premium and various other things, but we'll leave that to the experts. What we've actually experienced is the interest rates have stayed a bit higher at 5.25% and now dropped to 5%. We've got half of the year to go, so there's a likelihood there'll be some further drops. So just keeping the math simple, there's probably a delta between the plan and the actual of interest rates of about 0.5%. We have short-term debts of about 80 million, again, keeping the math simple. So we can only account for 400,000 of the 4 million variance between our plan versus actual for the interest rate payments as a function of the change in the interest rate profiling. Is that fair?
Simplistically, yes, but it's a lot more complicated than that in terms of supply and demand on short-term borrowing. So you won't be able to borrow at base rate. We're borrowing from other local authorities, so there is always a premium. So that percentage will be higher than the half percent.
I accept that, Ms. Welsfold, but the plan versus actual delta won't differ because the premium would be the same on both sides. So what you would have planned would have been with a premium, and then the actual would have been with a premium. So the delta is still 0.5%. So we can only account for 400,000 of a 4 million variance in year due to interest rates. The rest of it is down to officer error in the budgeting process.
It is, as I said before, working through what was in those service budgets. We have historically covered our debt interest through the performance of our property portfolio. That is no longer the case. And so whereas we have had the high interest rates, we have also seen a massive reduction in our property income coming through as a council, which aberrates the problem because we would always have paid off that interest from the property excess we had. Hence why previously we were able to build up the interest equalisation reserve. It was also included in the budget, I think, £2 million of interest equalisation reserve use, which obviously is a reserves transfer and not part of the budget.
Councillor Malbagan.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Mr. Watson. I suspected I was going to come to that in the end, the equalisation reserve. I mean, if you have 4 million, how much of that is going to come out of the equalisation reserve before the year end? Because if you take it off that, then our budget would balance off. Am I right in assuming that?
Yes, we would seek to use the balance that's in the equalisation reserve, first of all, to offset the overspend or the cost or under budgeting on that account. If it uses all of that reserve, we would then look to use others of our usable reserves to make sure where we get there. So we will then obviously have a reduction in our reserve levels.
Could I come back on that, please? Thank you for that, and that's very clear for me. But the real problem here, it seems that when we set the budget originally, the forecasting, based on what we knew at the time, has gone astray because the world hasn't moved the way we thought it would move or the advisors thought it would move. So hence we have got this slight issue. Is it an officer error or is it the forecasting error based on the advice we have received? I mean, that's something not to be debated today. It's something for us to actually think about when we actually present the next report. Thank you.
Excuse me. Yeah, hands up all round. We're talking about this report, which I believe is going to the executive. No? Okay. So we're acting on behalf of the executive. It's just that at the beginning it says to the executive.
Sorry, that's a typo then, no, it is delegated to this committee.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. Just a small question to start with. Going back to the minutes on page 5 at the top, the last time we looked at a Treasury Management outturn report, it says officers confirmed that the prudential indicators would be included in Treasury outturn reports going forward for ease of reference, but they could be found in the Treasury strategy. So I obviously went to the Treasury strategy to have a look, but it's not in this report.
So the outturn report and the strategies report are indicators. This is a min-year monitoring report. So therefore it's not an outturn, it's just a forecast of our outturn of where we're going to. In the same way that our budget reports, monitoring our revenue budgets are done as mid-year reports and provide a forecast. On the forecasting, and to Councillor Mavagana's point, a budget is always an estimate. A forecast is an estimate on an estimate. We try to get them as accurate as we can, but things do go awry at times.
Councillor MacDonald.
The fundamentals of this council have not changed, and the debt profile has not changed in the last year. I fundamentally refute Councillor Mavagan's statements. So we have about 100, and this is a humble chartered chemical engineer trying to tell a chartered accountant how to look at the numbers. 100 million of our debt is fixed. We know, because it's in the document and it hasn't changed because it's long-term debt, that it was at 2.73%. So ballpark figure, we should have been paying 2.7 million interest in the budget, or planned to spend 2.7 million on just the long-term debt. The only bit that was open to the market was the short-term local authority debt as it went through the cycle, on the annual cycle and the anniversaries and everything else. And I agree with Ms Welsfold, there's some variance there, but the profile that was detailed in the medium-term financial strategy and then the profile we have experienced is probably about 0.5% difference. So that is about 400,000 on a 4 million variance, which is a truly shocking state of affairs for this council to be in. What concerns me even more going forward, and I'm glad somebody mentioned the property portfolio, because in total between the MRP and the interest rate, interest charge, which as we know is predominantly due to the property portfolio, we will have this year a cost of about 9.5 million. We also know that the 6 million that was budgeted in the medium-term financial strategy is probably not going to be achieved in terms of income from that portfolio. So there is a 4 million gap in terms of the profitability or the robustness of that portfolio. When we now look forward into future years, that's the bit that really worries me, because a 1 year 4 million hit can be accommodated. What I don't understand is whether I should be assuming it's going to be a 4 million delta next year, a 4 million the year after, a 4 million the year after that, because that is catastrophic to the council's finances, and I need some clarity whether that was baked into the medium-term financial strategy.
Potentially, elements of it were, as I say, they were in the service areas. We're now stripping those out of the service areas to give that clarity, and the budget reports that will come forward to the executive and to the Performance and Finance Scrutiny Committee over the next few months as we build the budget up will include that 4-year forecast of going out. So it will be factored in. We will hopefully be able to factor in any upside that may come from interest rates that we believe will be there at some point, but it's not going to be a massive area in there. Fundamentally, the council has a budget deficit, as we've reported year on year, that will generally push the council into negative reserves, and it's always been in that 5th to 6th year of the medium-term financial strategy if you extrapolated forward and did the forward look. The issue that's going to come about now when we start doing the next 4-year medium-term financial strategy is that unless the council does something, and therefore I'm not saying the council is going to go and run out of money, but it has to do something to address it. And that is something that needs to be done in the next 2 to 3 years. Otherwise, we will potentially use all our reserves by the end of that 4th year.
Sorry, there was one behind you.
Councillor Mailwagner. Not the fellow behind you. Sorry, I heard it as you saying fellow behind you.
Okay.
Sorry.
Councillor Lee.
I don't know what Councillor McDonald was on about. I don't know what I agreed or disagreed with. All what I was saying about, just for clarity, is that if our forecasting, what the forecast and the budget you the officers, did it based on what you had knowledge of at that time. Yes, whether you calculate it on this fixed birth or whatever it is, you also had advice from Link or the agents we use, as to what the forecast would be. So based on all that, your team had actually calculated an interest element. What I'm sure none of us knew that my forecast in the past was that it was going to come down. And I never thought it'll get stuck, right, like it has done now. Possibly it'll come down in the future. I'm sure it will. So there's going to be an element of additional interest. My question to you, I repeat again, most of that would come out of the interest equalization account while you are reallocating the interest element within your budgets. Yes, any excess, or it'll come out of our reserves. If that's a simple sort of way I could say it today. If you can clarify that for me, please. Thank you, Ms. Watson.
Yes, so as you say, we would first call on the interest equalisation account, which is one of our usable reserves that we have set as an earmarked. Once that is exhausted, we'd have to then look at using other of our reserves to that point in time. I will go back to the point I just made that the council has to find some way to mitigate the budget gap that we've got. You can say, yes, we had advisors, and they are advisors. They don't set policy for the council. We looked at such bodies as the Institute of Fiscal Studies and the Office of Budget Responsibility to give us the idea of where they thought interest rates were going. And on that, we made some assumptions. These were assumptions that were listed in the medium-term financial strategy at Appendix 5. This was agreed with the executive and then fully agreed by council in February.
Can I ask a question? Thank you. You mentioned negative reserves. Is that sort of rang an alarm bell in my head, but I just don't understand what it means in accounting terms.
There is potentially no such thing as a negative reserve in the usable reserves. Councils will hold them in the unusable reserves, particularly when they get a statutory override issued by the government in the case of the dedicated schools grant that's currently sat in most education authorities, which is a negative reserve, but actually is money the council's had to spend, but is not charged against the tax account. No, if we hit a place where our reserves have completely gone, then we'd have to throw ourselves on the mercies of the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government to come and either sort us out or bail us out. We are not unique in that situation. The majority of councils that I tend to speak to with other Section 151s are all in that similar position that they can get through the next 2 to 3 years, but after that, failing a major turnaround or intervention, they are likely to be in the same situation as we are, where they have no longer any reserves, and what we would be then doing is just running the council day to day on the statutory services we have to provide based on the income we collect in from council tax and business rates. Everything else we do would have to go almost into a pot where we just can't no longer afford to do it. In theory, we should be able to have a balanced budget, providing our statutory services from the funding we receive.
Okay, thank you. And again, bear a little brain, I'm afraid. At the moment, we're running at a deficit. The deficit is bigger than we thought it was. And if we carry on like this, our reserves will go. Then what do we do?
We're running at a deficit now for the last 3 or 4 years, well, certainly 3 years since I've been here, on the budget. The gap has grown this year due to demand pressures on services, due to the interest pressures we're getting on the budgets and items such as that. So if you look at what we're paying in debt interest in 21-22, it spiked in 22-23 and it's gone up again in 23-24. Miss Walsford has the figures if you want to get those figures. But you are correct in the premise that currently we're running at a deficit. If we keep running at a deficit, we will eventually use all our reserves and potentially the council will have to go into some form of special measures, or if need be, a Section 114 notice would be issued. But the expectation is that I would have to intervene first of all to try and control the council's expenditure before we go to that position. If that does not work or fails, then it would be a case I would have to write the letter to the leader, the auditors and the chief executive stating the council is no longer able to set a balanced budget.
Thank you. Councillor Lee.
You're very kind, Chair. So the interest equalisation fund, how much is there in it at the moment? Good evening, gentlemen, and thank you for your time. Thank you very much. How much is in the interest equalisation fund? Thank you.
At the end of 23-24, there's approximately 4 million. And we're projecting the drawdown that's projected in the budget of 1.7 million means that 2.2. We haven't allocated anything else yet.
How much do you think we'll use this year of the interest equalisation fund?
All of it.
Okay. After we've used all of the interest equalisation fund, how much more do we need to spend on interest payments?
It will add on to the budget, so it will increase the savings. So when we present the position, I suppose the overall deficit that we've spoken about in year, then we say we're going to fund X from reserves. We obviously won't have those reserves, so it will have to be found within services, essentially, as a simplistic.
How much is that in monetary terms?
I guess we're looking at the 4 million overspend is what it is at the moment.
So 4 million minus the balance. So what's the additional payment we need to make on interest after we've exhausted the interest equalisation fund, which will exhaust this year?
So this year it'll be about just shy of 2 million with what's left in there for 24-25.
So will the interest equalisation fund reach zero this year?
In all likelihood, yes.
Okay. So where will the money come to pay the interest next year, given that interest rates haven't come down?
That's something that we'll be looking at and working on as part of the budget build, so I can't say at the moment at this stage. It's too early in the process.
And approximately how much are we going to need to find for next year, ballpark?
We haven't got those figures yet. We started the budget build and we're now having to go through. So depending on what services have put forward in their budgets, what the interest comes out as, we don't know the actual the total figure yet. We'll know that. We're working on it, so we'll know it in the next month or two. Where we are.
But it's a sum of interest in the millions of pounds. Is that fair to say?
Interest is, because as reported in this report, we're 4 million adrift. So as the base case, that carry forward. But obviously, we don't know that position yet.
So I guess it's going back to my previous point that we've exhausted the reserves to cover interest. So in terms of the treasury piece, we don't have a plan at the moment from the excess interest spend. So I'm guessing that there is a plan in the risk treatment plan for the treasury piece downgrading the risk. So it would be interesting to see if you've seen that risk treatment plan of where the money is going to come from.
So we have, as a council, a number of usable reserves. It obviously makes common sense to use the interest equalisation earmarked reserve for equalising the interest payments at this point in time. Once that has gone, there will be a decision to be taken by the administration as to which reserves they then wish to draw down to offset the future interest costs, or how they mitigate our debt financing by potentially rationalising our real estate to reduce the level of debt we have by generating capital receipts. So there are a number of options we can go through. We could also potentially suggest or ask that the administration considers raising a higher precept against the taxpayer to cover the debt position that we've got. That would have to be a choice for the administration. Officers can advise on the figures and provide the options there, but that is not a decision that officers would be taking.
Are you going to cheer me up some more?
I always cheer you up, Chair. Before we bought the properties, like the mall and stuff, was this council debt-free?
I believe we're debt-free up to about 2014, 2015, yes.
So prior to buying the properties, this council was debt-free. Is that fair to say?
I would have to go back to the previous sets of accounts to see where we are, and the outturn reports if we got that information, but it seems to suggest that we were at that point in time.
Chair, that probably doesn't cheer you up too much, but it's interesting to know.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. A question on the list of short-term borrowing loans and the counterparties. You mentioned earlier about it's like a sort of marketplace of supply and demand for short-term loans, and that probably explains the premium on the interest rates and the maturities. Some of them are now quite short, just 5 months or 6 months or something. And given that the counterparties are all local authorities as well, so they're going to be getting short of money, and there's going to be more local authorities looking to borrow in the same market. is there a risk there that this market eventually becomes closed to us to borrow at a reasonable maturity and reasonable rates? Is it going to, is there even a slight risk that at some point we might be trying to borrow and the cupboard's bare, no one's offering?
So there are a number of options open to us as to where we can borrow from. We can go out onto the open market. We borrow based on the fact that we're a tax raising authority and backed by the government's sovereign rating, which I believe is currently AA minus at this point in time. We can borrow from the government itself, the debt management office like that. Most local authorities, as we do ourselves, because we have a number of investments at any point in time, have working cash balances. So in our case, we will get in the precept that we demand from the taxpayer on the 1st or 2nd of the month, and at some point during that month we'll pay that money over to our staff as salaries. Towards the end of the month we pay it over to the other preceptors. So don't forget, we are collecting in up to £100 million a year on council tax alone, and another 36 million on business rates. So that comes in, it goes out again when we pay it over to those people who it needs to go to, and we retain it. So some local authorities have better reserves where they can lend for a longer period of time. So that's what we go to with the short-term loan with local authorities. So yes, as the money supply in local authorities gets smaller and smaller, potentially if the statutory override on the education services disappears, then those services will see a lot of their cash balances disappear as well. So it will get tighter, but there's always the government we can go back to and the debt management office if we need to borrow from them.
And we don't borrow from them at the moment, obviously, because presumably that's because they don't offer the interest rates and the maturities that we're interested in.
On short term, yes, it tend to be better with local authorities. Longer term, we have debt management or PWLB loans, which is the same thing, because they've given us the longer security, because most local authorities, under their treasury strategies, will not normally lend anything longer than 2 to 5 years.
Okay, so it is a risk then that if this market becomes, well, less convenient for us, higher rates or less convenient maturities?
We could, at any point in time, convert a large chunk of that short-term debt into long-term debt. We have a capital financing requirement, our underlying need to borrow, running at 200 million. We have 100 million of long-term debt. We have potentially 70 million of short-term debt. We could convert that short-term debt into long-term debt, although I doubt I would be thanked if I locked in at the current rates for 40 years what the current rates are. So the idea will be is, as rates come down, we will pick an opportune moment to probably lock in some more longer-term debt and lose some of this short-term debt.
Being conscious of the time, last one.
Can definitely agree with that, Mr. Watson. We don't want to lock in the debt at these ridiculous rates, so thank you for that observation. I'm struggling a little bit with the figures from the medium-term financial strategy, as you know, and I'm struggling to find out which figures I can now hold on to on the basis of the revelations in today's report that we've been discussing. But there genuinely, I think, was a drain on the reserves, as for argument's sake, 2 or 3 million a year. Would you agree with that number roughly?
Yes, as I alluded to about 5-10 minutes ago, that we have always been setting a deficit budget as a council because our costs exceeded our funding. Now you could say, where does that come from? Are we extravagant in our spending, or are we just underfunded by central government over the last 14 years or so, I would suggest. Potentially 2011, 2012 was the last time we used to see a rise every year in the revenue support grant or funding formula as it was in those days. And since then, it's got less and less, and we've had to become more self-sufficient on our own tax-raising abilities, plus using our reserves.
So that's roughly a yes. I think based on today's discussion and the very diligent report that Ms Welsford's put forward, we can approximately say that we've doubled now that reserve on that drain on reserves going forward in each year, which changes the trajectory from there to there. Now, I absolutely fundamentally agree with your point around it's the officer's duty to put forward the situation and the options, and for the democratically elected members of this council to then make the decisions as to how we go forward. I guess there's two fundamental issues here though, which is we have to have accurate information and we have to have good insights and options in order to make those decisions. And I think that's something that the team needs to reflect on as we go into the next budget cycle, because we should not be accepting a 4 million variance on a budget of, on a net cost of provision of services of 17 million. It's just completely wacko. The last point I'd like to make, and I think this is more in your jurisdiction than mine, but I'm happy to take to refer to the monitoring officer and others to take a formal view, is my understanding, and it's a shame our colleagues over here are not still with us, my understanding is under the new regime, with the various bodies that oversee local government, that we are supposed to flag up ahead of time whether we are in trouble or not. My view, based on these figures and these projections that we're starting to see, is that we can't be far away from having that conversation about how do we get the support, which could include the things that you suggested, like retaining more of our business rates would be a nice one. That's one we've discussed here before. Or potentially getting proper funding for new houses rather than hitting an arbitrary cut-off and then getting nothing, or not hitting an arbitrary cut-off and getting nothing. But how do you see writing that letter to start having the conversations?
So there are potentially a couple of options. I have all 151 officers have a standing invite from the head finance civil servant at the ministry to have off the record conversations. I can do that. I can, if it's so wished by the administration, to write a formal letter to the ministry and the Secretary of State saying that we consider ourselves to be in a position where, unless something turns round, we will be running out of reserves at the end of our medium-term financial strategy. As you say, it is partly my decision, but the unfortunate thing is the only time I have the authority to write a letter saying the council has gone bust or is going bust is when the council has gone bust. So I'm quite happy if that's what the administration would like me to do, and I suggest democratically, Mr Ramtel might confirm it, that this committee can make the recommendation to the executive, and then the executive can direct me to make a formal approach to the ministry.
Will that get us more of our business rates back? Do you think? Chances?
Chances of that are probably a little bit around zero. The issue being is that the government will come back with business rates reform is on the cards, and it'll be issued out in probably 2 or 3 years' time, which may or may not be too late for this council.
So how much have we got to increase the car parking charges to make up the difference? You know, we need money from somewhere, don't we?
We should look at all options for generating extra income. As I say, that is where officers can provide the numbers and what it would do, but the actual decision to do that rests with the elected officials, elected councillors.
as I said before, it can only be based on accurate information and good insights. And I really think the officers need to reflect on that based on a 4 million variance on this interest rate provision.
Indeed, and if I can offer any form of reassurance, the best thing to rely on is firstly the monitoring reports that we have here today, and we'll get again the next committee for the Q2 from Treasury, and the monitoring reports on revenue and capital that will be presented to the Executive on the 5th of November and P&F on the 6th of November, and then obviously as part of the budget build going forward.
You had a tiny one, and this will be the last.
I've just had a very stern look from the chair and I've smiled back and I've not melted. This is a good sign. I think the discussion we've just had does question whether the risk of a 114 notice being issued should be on the risk register. I think from what we've heard tonight, I think we're talking a couple of years away. That's very close. I think it needs to be on the risk register, I'm afraid. So that's my observation. My question separately to Bob is, are the reserves cash, or are we taking out more borrowing every time we dip into the reserves?
So if you look at the council's capital financing requirement, our underlying need to borrow, it's about £208 million. That's based on our capital programmes previously and what we've gone and bought and what we're going to be doing in the next financial year. If you look at our level of external debt, it's about £170 million. Ballpark figure at this point in time. 100 million in long term, 70 million in short term. So the difference between those two is about 37, 38 million pounds, which is potentially the reserve figure we've got. So what we have, that 38 million pounds between our underlying need to borrow at 208 and the actual borrowing we've done at 170 is referred to as internal borrowing. So basically we've used our internal balances to avoid borrowing extra money externally, therefore avoiding the interest costs. We still pay the minimum revenue provision on the internal borrowing, but we avoid some of the interest costs. Ideally, what I'd like to be able to do is have reserves or money coming in that I could then reduce our external debt pile and increase our internal borrowing. So I don't have £38 million in little jam jars in my office. Unfortunately, it is in fact a paper holding that we've got based on the fact we've used that reserve balances to avoid borrowing longer term. Hence why we could convert some of our short term into longer term. We could borrow another £30 odd million of external borrowing. That doesn't help us because you then start incurring that interest cost at that point in time. So it just makes the situation into a ever expanding spiral of debt. So yes, we haven't got the money sat in cash, but we have the ability to convert what we've internally used for internal financing back into cash if we need to.
So at the risk of sounding like Jim Hacker, I'm assuming...
Rob, I think we know where we are now.
So it is borrowing, the reserves are borrowing. Cool.
Okay. That was an interesting discussion. Thank you, everybody. Work programme. Alex, you've got anything to say about the work programme, or do we just agree it?
Thank you, Chair. On the work programme, Grant Thornton's report asks us to have a meeting in January 2025.
I think I've discussed that, and it may well be coming in your diary.
Sorry, I couldn't catch what you said.
The date for the meeting, I think it's coming in the diary, but I'd certainly agree with you that we do need a meeting to take that into account. And if I've got them mixed up, but yes, you are correct, and we shall have one. Yeah. Okay, members, officers, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. It's time to go home.